November 7th, 2016. It's a Monday night in Jacksonville, Florida, the Sunshine State's biggest city.
Not only is it home to nearly 1 million people, but it also sprawls across 800 square miles.
Jacksonville, in landmass area, is the largest city in the United States.
But Jacksonville also has some very big problems.
Our homicide rate is out the roof. Jacksonville has some lovely parts and then some parts where some people just don't feel the safest.
It's a little after 10 o'clock that evening when a call comes in from one of those parts of town.
Jacksonville 911.
There's a man laying out here in the street.
Do you think he needs an ambulance?
I see him bleeding.
But the driver doesn't intend to stick around and offer help.
I'm not getting out of the car to see if he's okay.
She was worried about whether or not the person who had hurt them was still in the area.
Although when officers arrive at the scene a few minutes later, there's only the man.
They find a black male laying in a pool of blood. He has a gunshot wound to the head. He doesn't have a pulse.
How he'd ended up on the side of the road isn't entirely clear.
There were pieces of shattered glass right beside his body.
They were consistent with automotive safety glass.
So it was either a drive-by shooting or the murder had occurred somewhere else and the body was dropped there.
All the police know for sure is that the victim is 31-year-old Eddie Brown.
They looked in his pockets and they found his identification as well as the keys to a nearby hotel.
But that's all first responders could find.
Jacksonville native Eddie Brown made a name for himself as a young man.
He was a very accomplished athlete. He was a star on a high school basketball team that won the Florida State Championship.
He had a very promising athletic future. So he had these huge hoop dreams. He wanted to go to the NBA or play professionally.
But those dreams were dashed in an instant.
When he was in college, his nephew was killed, and then that caused him to come home. It was like a part of his life shut off.
It might have broken him if he hadn't met Serena Tenney soon after.
I was, I think, 20 when I met him. We was at a club. I was walking past him, and he said, "Excuse me."
That was all it took.
I looked at him, and then I double took, and the next thing you know, I just went to him.
Hey.
Sorry for bumping into you.
Don't be.
I remember giving him my number, and it went from there. It was like love at first sight. We was always having fun.
But it was the way that Eddie doted on her daughter from a previous relationship that sealed the deal.
It's like, yeah, he's the one.
Before long, Serena was pregnant with Eddie's child.
He was just so happy.
They soon had a second child as well.
You know how they say most people, when you have kids, they change? 9 times out of 10, it be for the worse? No. He was the dad that gave them whatever they wanted. They played to sun up to sundown. He was a family guy. It was fun.
And after 7 years together, Serena and Eddie decided to finally make things official.
He came up behind me in the kitchen, and when I turned around, he slowly went down.
What are you doing?
Will you marry me?
Oh my gosh.
When he asked me, my mouth just dropped. And I was like, oh my God, are you serious? And then I told him yes, and we laughed. I cried.
But now, just a few months after the engagement, first responders are scrambling to save Eddie's life.
He was discovered on the side of the road with a gunshot wound to the head.
He didn't have a pulse.
Despite that, the EMTs don't declare him dead at the scene.
They put him on a gurney and started chest compressions.
They do take him to the hospital.
By then, detectives are on the scene.
Pulled up on the body, got some blood over there. I pulled a wallet out of his pocket. Eddie Brown, he's got some priors.
When police ran Eddie's name through the database, they found he had a lengthy rap sheet.
This may have been drug-related.
After a tragedy ended his dreams of stardom, Eddie Brown found love and fulfillment with his fiancée, Serena Tenney.
Will you marry me?
They had hopes of a great future together.
But now, EMTs have rushed Eddie to the hospital, his life hanging in the balance.
He has a gunshot wound to the head. He was found discarded on the side of the road like trash.
Detectives suspect the shooting was drug-related.
He had some drug history in his past.
The crime scene also offers detectives some possible clues.
They did have the shattered glass that they saw around him. It indicated that he was shot inside of a vehicle and pulled or pushed out of the vehicle.
Detectives also have the motel key card that first responders found in Eddie's pocket.
At that point, we went straight to the motel.
Talking to the hotel manager, they determined that he had been staying there for a few weeks.
Hi, good evening. Hey there.
Hoping it could reveal the shooter's identity, detectives also ask for copies of the motel's security video.
I can put that on a thumb drive for you.
That would be great.
Right. We appreciate it.
After securing the footage, the detectives head to the hospital to check on the victim.
By then, Eddie's fiancée learned of the shooting.
It was 2:48 in the morning. I'm like, who is this? Can I speak to Eddie? She said, do Eddie have any living family? And I'm like, why? What's going on? And she was like, I need you to contact his family and get to the hospital now.
Serena called Eddie's parents and then raced to the hospital.
When she gets there, the doctor is waiting.
Where's Eddie? Where's Eddie? I got a phone call. Where?
And they said, I'm sorry, Eddie didn't make it. And I just freaked out. I lost it.
Serena is still trying to pull herself together when the detectives arrive at the hospital.
Serena?
Yes.
I'm a detective. I know this is tough.
I told her this case would not be a cold case, and I meant that.
She made it clear to investigators that he was a very important part of her life.
However, she also admits that Eddie was no angel.
Serena told police that he had been selling drugs to help with family expenses.
I told him I don't condone in what you're doing.
Despite that, Eddie didn't stop.
It's fast, quick money, and it's hard to want to go back to a normal job and get a normal paycheck.
Still, Serena says she yearned for a normal life.
I said, that's not the life that I want for me or my kids.
That's why I called up the engagement and he moved out.
Which explained what he was doing at the motel.
Although according to Serena, Eddie had recently started having second thoughts.
He told me that he was gonna leave everything alone. He was like, I got stuff to take care of, but I'm gonna come home.
It kind of sounded like Eddie wanted to make one last big score before calling it quits.
Had it ended up costing Eddie his life?
And any idea who could have done this to him?
No.
Do you know any of the names of the guys he did business with?
No. I didn't want any part of it.
Thank you for your time.
Or is it possible Serena knew more about Eddie's death than she was letting on?
There was some discord in the relationship that may provide a motive.
Detectives hope the answer lies somewhere in the surveillance footage from Eddie's motel.
Yes, Scott?
As investigators scrub through the footage from the night Eddie died, they notice a white vehicle pull into a parking spot just before 10 p.m., just minutes before he was shot and killed.
On the video, a woman gets out of the SUV.
She walked up to Eddie Brown's motel room. He opened the door to let her in.
Serena was definitely not the woman that they had saw on the surveillance video.
Then, while Eddie and the mystery woman are inside his room, a man gets out of the same SUV and walks around the motel, out of sight.
You could tell something was going on because he didn't stay inside the vehicle.
A few minutes later, Eddie and the mystery woman leave his motel room and get into the SUV.
She got inside the front driver's seat, and Eddie Brown walked around to the front passenger seat.
Then, as the mystery woman is pulling out of the parking space, the man who'd gotten out of the car suddenly reappears.
She stopped, got out of the vehicle, gave him a hug as though she just saw him, even though they had pulled up to the motel room together. And he got inside of the back passenger seat, and then they drove away.
The 911 call reporting Eddie shot on the side of the road came in just a few minutes later.
The detectives suspected he died inside that white SUV.
But who were the mystery woman and her passenger?
It was impossible to make out the license plate on the surveillance video.
Hoping Eddie may have been in contact with a woman prior to their meetup, the detectives subpoena his phone records.
They discover he received a phone call shortly before he was found dead.
Police then tracked that phone number to a person named Angel Hernandez.
When the detectives bring Angel in for questioning, he admits that he knows Eddie.
He knows him by the nickname of Brick.
But he says he's not the one that called Brick from his phone that night.
According to Angel, at 9:30 p.m., a woman he only knows as Shayla knocked on his door.
He knew Shayla from the street. She would occasionally come over and ask to use his phone.
And according to Angel, Shayla had someone with her.
Can I borrow your phone?
Can you describe him best you can?
Black male, short hair, not stalking anything, average build.
There you go.
It sounded like the man from the video.
Angel says he'd let Shayla borrow his phone.
Eddie, we need to talk.
He couldn't hear everything that they were talking about.
But what he heard sounded urgent.
I get the sense that there was a worry.
In fact, it sounded like Eddie already knew what was going to happen.
Shayla, you're gonna get me killed.
Detectives investigating Eddie Brown's murder have a possible lead on the mystery woman who came to his motel room shortly before he was shot and dumped on the street a few blocks away.
His phone records that showed that the call he had received before he died was from a male that they hadn't been aware of before. His name was Angel.
But when police tracked down Angel, he swore he didn't make that call.
Hey, Shayla.
He says a woman named Shayla showed up at his door and asked if she could use his phone. She made a phone call to the victim, Eddie Brown.
And according to Angel, it was a tense conversation.
I can hear through the earpiece sitting getting loud on the other side.
Angel said he overheard Eddie on the phone call say, "You're going to get me killed."
He said that to her?
Twice.
Obviously, there's a motive there that the investigators need to discover.
Could you tell whether she was trying to meet up with him later?
Definitely the conversation was sweet.
When detectives show Angel images from the motel surveillance videos, it appears that is exactly what happened.
Angel confirms that the woman in the video is Shayla, and the man who got in the back seat is the man she was with.
But that's about all that Angel knew.
to go. Appreciate you coming in.
With Angel unable to identify the woman further, the detectives turned back to Eddie's fiancée, Serena.
They showed me a picture.
She didn't recognize the man, but she knew the woman.
That's not her real name.
She said, "You sure that's not Shayla?" I said, "No. Her real name is Felicia." And she did dates off a back page and a little street walking.
She was also a customer of Eddie's.
She'll go do dates to bring back more money to Eddie just to get her high.
But rumor has it, Felicia would sometimes skip the middleman.
She would trade Eddie's sex for drugs.
She got drunk and she told me.
Serena admits that's what really caused the split between her and Eddie.
When she told me, I went in the house and I packed this stuff and I had to by the front door.
That's the reason he was living in a motel. But recently he said...
But then, just before his murder, Eddie had told Serena he and Felicia were through.
He was like, "I just wanted to let you know I don't want nothing to do with her. I just want my family back."
If what Serena is telling them is true, did she just give Felicia a motive?
Police did wonder whether or not she may have been jealous of the fact that Eddie was going back to Serena.
5 days after the murder, detectives track Felicia down and start asking her questions about Eddie.
What about what happened earlier this week? That don't have nothing to do with that, man.
She told police that she had heard about his death on the news and that she was heartbroken.
And even though they were no longer involved, they were still good friends. They stayed in contact.
She also admits to seeing him the evening of the murder.
She wanted to buy some weed from him.
You want me to be honest, that's what I went for.
She tells detectives on the night of November 7th she borrowed a car from her friend named Pop.
Felicia says that Pop had also asked her to give a ride to a friend of his, a man she only knew as BT.
She did agree to give him a ride, but she told him that she had to run some errands first.
From Pop's place, they drove over to Angel Hernandez's house so that she could call Eddie. He told her to come by the hotel to buy some weed.
Then you went over there to the hotel? Yeah.
She said when she got to the motel, BT told her that he would just walk the rest of the way.
Only be a minute. Suit yourself.
Felicia says she'd left BT in the car and gone to Eddie's door.
But while she was inside, Eddie made her an offer.
You wanted me to take me to get something to eat.
But she says that as they were leaving, BT had suddenly reappeared.
What's up? We're walking. I changed my mind, man.
She told him that was fine, but that Eddie wanted to take her out for dinner first.
So BT got back in the car and they all headed out to dinner.
But according to Felicia, they didn't get far.
She said while they were driving to the restaurant, BT then gets a call from Pop.
Hey, this Pop. He said you need a ride.
Yeah, we can. I went and picked him up over there somewhere off a highway.
And by the time they got Pop, she felt like it was too late to go out to eat.
Felicia says she then drove herself home and gave the keys to the SUV to Pop.
Pop then got behind the wheel and then the three men drove off together.
I didn't do anything.
According to Felicia, that's the last time she saw Eddie.
Last time I saw him, he was alive. Leaving.
And the conversation Angel overheard, the one where Eddie supposedly said Felicia was going to get him killed?
According to her, it never happened.
That's not the way anything went down.
And she swears she didn't have anything to do with Eddie's murder.
I'm not trying to be disrespectful. But for someone to even come at me like I did anything to him, no.
Detectives aren't quite ready to believe her. But before they lean on her any harder, they want to track down the man she knows only as BT.
It seemed likely that he had something to do with Eddie's death.
But before they can begin searching for him, they get a call from Angel Hernandez.
He told them that he had heard some talk from the streets.
He let them know Felicia had allegedly lent Eddie $500.
The problem is she didn't have $500 to lend.
500?
She had stolen that $500 from her sugar daddy, a drug dealer by the name of Millie.
Was that why Eddie said she was going to get him killed?
Informant Angel Hernandez has contacted detectives investigating Eddie Brown's murder with a lead on the possible motive behind the crime.
Felicia had allegedly lent Eddie $500.
The problem is she didn't have $500 to lend. She had stolen the $500 from a local drug dealer named Millie, or as she liked to call him, her sugar daddy.
Could that explain how Eddie ended up dead on the side of the road?
Allegedly, when Millie found out she had stolen the money, he became furious.
This is where on the streets, you know what I'm saying?
It would not be uncommon for a drug dealer to react to somebody that owed him money with violence.
Detectives immediately haul Millie in for an interview.
Need to ask you a few questions.
They make it clear that they're not there to discuss his drug activity.
They assure him they just want to talk to you about Eddie's homicide.
He denied knowing anything about the murder.
But he doesn't deny everything.
Millie said, "Oh, I knew about the $500.
Okay, so that money is yours. He confirms to police that she did steal $500 from him.
I'm just guessing here. Maybe you wanted him dead because you guys had a beef.
But he denies any involvement in the murder, and he denies having any issue with Eddie.
I mean, I'm not with no beef. No.
All he wanted was his money.
Millie says he told her she better pay him back and she better do it soon.
Was that why Felicia had gone to see Eddie that night?
She had the motivation to recover that money no matter what.
In addition to a possible motive, Millie also knew Lisa's likely accomplice.
BT is 26-year-old Blair Terry, and Pop's real name is Jason Stevens.
He also provides police with the address of where they can find Jason Stevens. They call it a trap house, and he told me exactly where it was located.
Is he telling the truth about any of it?
He knows the more helpful I am towards them, the less they're going to focus on me as a suspect.
The detectives weren't entirely sure that Millie was telling them everything that he knew.
But at the end of the interview, they have no choice but to let him go.
We didn't have anything to hold him on.
Then they follow up on his tip on where to find Jason.
We drive by that house numerous times, and we found a white SUV on the side of the road.
It was a match for the SUV in the motel video.
So I thought, wow, this is it. This has got to be the car.
Closer examination all but confirms it.
Look at this.
The passenger side window has recently been replaced, and the workmanship was very shoddy.
There's broken glass all over the seat.
They call out their crime scene investigators to come and do a full forensic investigation.
Let's go talk to him.
Yeah.
Then the detectives locate Jason inside the house and bring him in for questioning.
He did admit to the fact he loaned the vehicle out to Felisa Lapano.
You regularly let people use that vehicle?
Yes.
Okay, in exchange for money?
Mm-hmm.
She paid him $100 to borrow the vehicle.
Okay. Who was with her?
BT.
But that's where the similarities in Felicia and Jason's stories end.
Jason denied that he ever called BT to come pick him up.
He says he was at home the whole night.
He says he hadn't seen them from the time they picked up his car until the following morning.
When she gave you back the keys, did anything seem off or strange about her or the way she was acting?
No, not really.
But Jason says that when he went to drive the car an hour or so later, he was in for a shock.
The passenger side door window was shattered.
Broken out completely?
Completely.
They didn't tell him about it. They just dropped the car off.
Jason said he was furious. He wanted to know what happened to his car.
Jason says he'd reached out to BT for an explanation.
He gave me the answer that it was either him or me.
What are you even talking about?
I asked him, who is him?
Brick, man. It was Brick.
Brick was Eddie's street name that he was known by as a drug dealer.
According to Jason Stevens, a man named Blair Terry had all but confessed to the murder of Eddie Brown.
He basically stated it was either him or me.
Which suggested that Blair was the one who shot Eddie.
As he's telling you these things, are you asking any more questions?
No, not really. Now I don't even want to know no more.
BT did at least agree to pay for the window he shot out of Jason's SUV.
So he called a glass company, had the window repaired.
For the moment, detectives aren't sure that Jason is telling them the whole truth.
Felisa said that Jason called them later that night, asking them to pick him up, which he denies.
But as soon as CSI start examining Jason's SUV, there is little doubt they've uncovered the crime scene.
When you open the door, you can hear the glass inside the door frame. You could hear the glass shake.
Inside, other than a few scattered shards of glass, the car appears relatively clean.
But once we processed the vehicle with the black light stuff, you can see there was blood all over that front seat. And the seat belt.
In the back seat, the detectives find more evidence of the shooting.
We found a .40 caliber shell casing underneath the floor mat in the back seat.
Which would be consistent with where BT was sitting on the video.
That was also consistent with Jason's story.
This solidifies the direction of their investigation and seriously looking at BT as the person who pulled the trigger.
Then, after sending blood samples from the SUV to the crime lab for testing, detectives bring Blair Terry in for questioning.
They started by getting him to admit that he knows Shayla.
Everybody around knew the white girl with the red hair as Shayla.
How long have you known her?
I've known her from just like the spurts you see in the hair, see in the hair.
Then the detectives move on to the night of November 7th, the night of Eddie's murder.
He tells them they had been hanging out at a friend's place.
You don't live there though, right? You just hang out there, or you just happen to be
No, I
there?
happen to just be there actually.
She mentioned she was going to borrow the car, so he asked her if she could give him a ride.
BT says that Felicia borrowed Jason's SUV and gave him a lift, but she made a few stops along the way.
The first stop was this guy's house that he didn't know. She told him that she needed to make a phone call.
This, of course, was that phone call that Angel Hernandez overheard.
She was telling him something like I was talking to him.
Yeah. What was she talking about?
I don't know. I wasn't focused on their conversation.
From there, they drove to a motel and she told him to wait in the car while she went inside to talk to someone.
I'll only be a minute.
BT says he sat in the car for a while, but he eventually grew impatient.
She was taking forever, and I'm like, well, okay, what's going on? So I got out of the car.
He wandered around the parking lot for a bit until he saw Felicia driving off.
This was all confirmed by the surveillance video.
When you got back in the car, there was another guy sitting in the front seat.
Yeah, that kind of freaked me out. I ain't know where Eddie was.
Yeah, who'd she say it was?
I don't know, she was like his ex. She didn't say no name.
He said that he never knew Eddie's name.
In fact, he claims they were only in the car together for a few minutes.
He claimed that he was dropped off at a local gas station.
Blair Terry said that he was dropped off while the victim was still sitting in the front seat.
And Felicia's claim that they made a detour to pick up Jason Stevens, aka Pop.
I don't even know Pop being around.
He says Pop was never with them in the car. So you don't know anything about the window. She never mentioned anything to you about anything happening in that car?
No, ma'am.
He said he didn't know what the detectives were talking about.
Okay, well, someone was shot and killed in that. Someone was shot and killed.
What?
Yeah. Someone was shot and killed in that car.
That's why I'm here.
At that point, BT decides to stop the interview.
I want to talk to a lawyer or something like that because I don't know what's going on right now.
That's what Blair Terry claims. But when the detectives follow up on his alibi, they find reason to doubt him.
They went to that gas station and looked for the surveillance.
Nowhere that evening at all was there any evidence of the white car or of BT being anywhere near that gas station.
It's proof that Blair was lying to them.
But it takes the test results from Pop's SUV to provide definite proof of where the murder occurred.
The DNA came back from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Biology Department, and that blood was a perfect match to the blood of Eddie Brown.
Once the test results are in, the detectives take both Felicia and Blair Terry into custody.
They had a probable cause to arrest both of them for the murder.
It's news Eddie's fiancée has been waiting to hear for weeks.
The lead detective called me January 15th, 2017. She said, Miss Tenny? I said, yes, ma'am. She said they was arrested for second-degree murder. I was happy. I was overjoyed.
But will her happiness prove premature?
The next challenge is going to be proving who pulled the trigger.
I don't want to hear another word from you!
Police have placed both Felicia Lapano and Blair Terry under arrest for the murder of Eddie Brown.
While both were charged with murder, detectives are convinced that Blair Terry pulled the trigger.
The full autopsy on Eddie Brown's body determines that the shot was fired from behind and to the left of the victim,
which was consistent with where BT was seated in the video just prior to the murder.
Will it be enough to convince a jury?
One of the first tactics they're going to use is to point the fingers at each other to try to create reasonable doubt.
Unsure they can secure a conviction, the prosecutors approach Felicia's lawyers with an offer.
She will be allowed to plead guilty to a reduced charge of second-degree murder. We needed her testimony to nail Blair Terry as the shooter.
But when it comes to sentencing, there's no guarantee.
In return for her testimony, her sentencing would be delayed until after BT's trial.
The prosecutors may have turned Felicia against him, but Blair Terry appears confident when he goes on trial for Eddie's murder.
It was intense. When he come out, we're already sitting out there, and he would just stare me in my face with a smirk on his face.
According to the prosecution, it was the look of a killer.
The prosecutors paint a picture, and they were able to weave all the elements together. BT's background and his criminal history and his violence.
Then, to make the picture complete, the prosecutors put Felicia on the stand.
She testified in the murder trial about what happened that evening. Felicia Lapano made that phone call to Eddie Brown's phone, and moments later, she pulls up to the motel with Blair Terry. She says she went to the motel to see Eddie to try to get back the money. And she took Blair Terry as backup just in case Eddie didn't want to pay her back.
Felicia says she and Eddie talked things out in the motel room.
Eddie, you gotta give me that money back.
You should have told me it was Millie's money.
That's why Eddie said to her, "You're going to get me killed."
It doesn't matter. You can get the money, right?
I guess. It'll take a minute, though.
Then they'd left Eddie's motel room to get something to eat.
But in the car, she and Eddie started to argue.
Down! I can't believe you did this to me! I'm sorry! Hey, don't talk to her like that.
Blair took exception to the way Eddie was talking to her.
But according to Felicia's testimony, what Blair did next caught her totally by surprise.
Blair Terry ended up shooting him in the back of the head.
What'd you do that for?
She said she had no idea what Blair Terry was going to do to Eddie Brown, and she did not know that Blair Terry had a handgun. She said she just wanted to get her $500 back.
Instead, they now had to try to cover up a murder.
BT told her to pull the car over. She pulled the car over. He got out of the car, pulled Eddie's body out of the front passenger seat, laid it by the side of the road, got back in the car, and they left.
When it's the defense's turn, Blair Terry's attorneys maintain that he wasn't in the car when Eddie was shot.
Blair's defense was, just like he told the investigators, hey, I just got a ride from this lady. They dropped me off. I have no idea how it happened.
Those claims carry little weight with the jury.
Blair Terry is found guilty of murder. He is sentenced to life in prison without parole.
The life sentence without parole would be appropriate for that sort of senseless violence.
Eddie's fiance doesn't see it that way.
I didn't call it justice because it didn't bring him back. But to know that because you took someone's life and you would never be able to live your life the way you want to, it gave me a little bit of peace.
But while Serena feels that Blair Terry's sentence falls short of justice, she believes Felicia's is an outrage.
She was sentenced to a 13-year prison term for second-degree murder.
I was livid about a 13-year sentence. That's not enough.
The reality is that people who cooperate and help the state get a conviction will get the benefit of helping the state get that conviction.
But that still leaves Eddie's family to deal with the aftermath of his untimely death.
He didn't deserve this. There's nothing in this case that would justify pulling the trigger and having Eddie Brown murdered.
As a victim of a violent crime, it didn't just impact him, it impacted all those people that cared about him. And he was a family man. He had people in his life that loved him.
It's just a heartbreaking situation for his fiance and his kids. He had young children that won't really remember him.
Although for his fiancée, Serena, their children do give her a little piece of Eddie to hold on to.
He's not here physically, but I feel him when it comes through my kids. And at times it's like I get frustrated, but then I remember, okay, maybe this is his way of telling me it's gonna be okay. Everything is gonna be okay. Just do what you gotta do. Hold on. Keep going. Keep fighting. And take it a day at a time. It's tough, but he's watching.
December 14th, 2012 began like any other winter morning in Newtown, Connecticut. The sky hung low and pale above the quiet suburban streets, and a thin layer of frost clung stubbornly to the lawns and rooftops as parents hurried children into warm jackets before school. Christmas lights still blinked softly on porches. Storefront windows downtown carried wreaths dusted with artificial snow. It was the kind of American town people imagined when they heard the phrase safe neighborhood. Tree-lined roads. White churches. Coffee shops opening before sunrise. A place where first graders carried backpacks larger than their shoulders and teachers greeted students by name before the morning bell. Nothing about that morning looked dangerous. Nothing about it looked historic. And yet, before the clock reached 10 in the morning, 20 children and 6 adults would be dead inside an elementary school hallway soaked in gunpowder and blood. The violence arrived so quickly that some survivors would later describe it not as a sequence of events, but as a rupture in reality itself. One moment there had been spelling lessons, crayons scratching paper, tiny shoes squeaking against polished classroom floors. The next moment came sounds too loud and too unnatural to belong inside a school. Sharp cracks splitting the silence. Screams cut short. Teachers lunging toward doors. Tiny bodies hiding beneath desks, while confusion spread faster than fear, because the children were too young to understand what death sounded like. Outside the school building, the winter air remained cold and still. Cars continued passing on nearby roads. Somewhere in town, coffee was still being poured into paper cups. Somewhere else, a radio played Christmas music. The contrast would later haunt investigators and parents alike. The world had not stopped when the shooting began. The sun still rose over Newtown, while children were being murdered only a few miles away. Inside Sandy Hook Elementary School, the smell of fresh paper, cafeteria food, and floor polish was replaced by burnt gunpowder drifting through narrow hallways. Teachers who had spent their careers teaching reading and arithmetic suddenly found themselves making impossible decisions within seconds. Some locked doors and pushed children into corners. Some used their own bodies as shields. Some tried to calm terrified 6-year-olds who could not understand why their teacher was trembling. Others never had time to react at all. The gunman moved through the building with terrifying speed. Witnesses later struggled to explain the sound of the rifle. It echoed differently than anything they had heard before, louder than fireworks, louder than slammed lockers, louder than thunder. The noise ricocheted through the hallways and classroom walls until it became impossible to tell where danger was coming from. Children cried for their parents. Teachers whispered for silence. Phones shook violently in adult hands as emergency calls flooded dispatch centers. And then came the waiting. For parents across Newtown, the first signs of horror arrived through fragments. A text message. A phone call. Rumors spreading between workplaces. Reports of an incident at the elementary school. No details at first. Just confusion. Just panic beginning to crawl slowly into the chest. Parents abandoned meetings, stores, offices, and errands. Tires spun against cold pavement as cars rushed toward the school. Some prayed the reports were exaggerated. Some convinced themselves it had to be an accident. A hunting mishap nearby. Maybe a domestic dispute. Anything except what it truly was. But as police vehicles screamed toward the school and helicopters began circling overhead, denial became impossible. The roads near Sandy Hook Elementary filled with emergency lights flashing red and blue against the gray winter morning. Officers carrying rifles ran toward the building while terrified children were escorted outside in trembling lines, eyes wide with confusion. Many were crying. Some held hands. Some covered their ears. Teachers tried desperately to comfort them while hiding their own horror. Then the realization spread through the crowd gathering behind police tape. Not every child was coming out. Parents scanned the faces of students emerging from the building with growing desperation. Relief exploded in some families as children ran into waiting arms. But for others, the nightmare deepened minute by minute. Every passing second without seeing their son or daughter felt like drowning in slow motion. The school became a place divided between those who had survived and those who had disappeared behind locked doors forever. Inside the classrooms, the destruction was almost beyond comprehension. Bullet holes shredded brightly colored walls decorated with children's artwork and holiday crafts. Tiny chairs sat overturned beside pools of blood. Papers remained scattered across desks where lessons had been interrupted mid-sentence. In some rooms, investigators would later find signs of teachers trying desperately to protect students until the very end. Small bodies huddled together where children had hidden instinctively from terror they were too young to fully understand. The youngest victims were only 6 years old. 6. Children who still believed monsters lived under beds. Children who needed help tying their shoes. Children who woke their parents during thunderstorms. Their names would soon become known across the world, but in those first terrible hours, they were simply missing children whose parents stood outside a school praying for miracles that were never coming. As news stations interrupted regular programming, the story spread far beyond Connecticut. America watched the horror unfold live. Anchors struggled to maintain composure while reporting details that sounded impossible even as they were confirmed. An elementary school. Multiple fatalities. Young children. A shooter still inside. Across the country, parents turned toward televisions in disbelief while schools quietly locked classroom doors as a precaution. And somewhere behind all the chaos, behind the sirens and cameras and breaking news banners, lay another horrifying truth investigators had not yet fully uncovered. Before the gunman entered Sandy Hook Elementary School, another person had already died. Inside a quiet house not far from the school, Adam Lanza had murdered his mother hours earlier. Nancy Lanza, 52 years old, was found dead in her bed, shot repeatedly before sunrise. The house itself looked disturbingly ordinary from the outside. Christmas decorations remained untouched. The neighborhood around it sat peaceful and silent beneath the winter cold. No one nearby could have imagined the massacre beginning inside those walls before spreading to an elementary school filled with children. The killer himself would remain an enigma almost immediately after his death. 20 years old. Pale. Thin. Isolated. A young man whose face would soon appear endlessly across newspapers and television screens. Yet the more investigators searched for clear explanations, the less clarity they found. No manifesto fully explaining his actions. No political ideology. No straightforward motive. Only fragments. Obsessions. Isolation. Darkness accumulating silently over years until it erupted in less than 5 minutes of unimaginable violence. The speed of the massacre became one of its most chilling aspects. By the time police entered the school and reached the shooter, it was already over. Adam Lanza had turned the gun on himself as officers closed in. The entire attack inside Sandy Hook Elementary lasted only minutes. Minutes that permanently scarred survivors, shattered families, and transformed a quiet Connecticut town into a symbol recognized around the world. In the days that followed, Newtown changed completely. Snow continued falling on the town's streets, while funeral processions moved slowly beneath police escorts. Stuffed animals, candles, flowers, and handwritten letters piled up outside the school in mountains of grief. Church bells rang constantly. Photographs of smiling children appeared everywhere, on television screens, newspapers, memorial posters. Faces frozen in life before the world learned how they died. People across America struggled to comprehend the scale of the loss. Even seasoned investigators and emergency responders admitted that crime scene haunted them long after they left the building. Teachers in other states looked differently at their classrooms. Parents held children tighter before school. First graders practiced lockdown drills with a new and terrifying seriousness. But grief was only the beginning. Because alongside mourning came anger. Questions. Blame. Debates about guns, mental illness, school safety, violence, media, warning signs, and responsibility. The tragedy became more than a massacre. It became a national wound exposed under relentless public scrutiny. Politicians argued. Activists mobilized. Families begged for change, while conspiracy theorists spread lies so cruel they reopened the trauma repeatedly for grieving parents. And beneath all of it lingered the same unbearable question. How could this happen inside a place built to protect children? How could a school hallway become a battlefield in the span of moments? Years later, survivors would still remember tiny details from that morning with terrifying clarity. The sound of footsteps in the hallway. The smell of gunpowder. A teacher's shaking voice trying to stay calm. The sight of police officers carrying rifles through classrooms decorated with snowmen and alphabet posters. Trauma etched those memories permanently into minds too young to carry them. For the families who lost children, time itself divided into two eras, before Sandy Hook and after Sandy Hook. Before, there had been ordinary mornings filled with lunchboxes, homework, cartoons, winter coats, and goodbye kisses at the front door. After, there were funerals. Empty bedrooms. Silence at dinner tables. Toys left untouched forever. And in the center of it all stood Sandy Hook Elementary School, a place once associated with childhood innocence, transformed forever into one of the darkest crime scenes in American history. Long before the world learned the name Sandy Hook, before television cameras crowded the streets of Newtown, and before grieving parents stood beneath falling snow outside funeral homes, there were simply children. Small children with missing front teeth, messy handwriting, oversized winter coats, and voices still soft with innocence. They were not symbols yet. They were not headlines. They were sons and daughters waking up on an ordinary Friday morning believing the day ahead would be completely normal. Some woke before sunrise and climbed into their parents' beds for warmth. Some complained about breakfast. Others rushed excitedly toward the calendar, because Christmas was only days away. In kitchens across Newtown, cereal bowls clinked softly against countertops while lunchboxes were packed with sandwiches, juice boxes, and little handwritten notes from mothers who expected to see their children again that afternoon. 6-year-olds live inside a world still protected by imagination. A bad dream can be fixed with a nightlight. Monsters disappear when adults enter the room. School is a place of crayons and gold stars and reading circles on colorful carpets. Most children at that age do not fully understand death. They understand scraped knees, broken toys, and maybe the sadness of losing a pet. The violence waiting for them on December 14th belonged to an adult nightmare they were never supposed to encounter. Inside Sandy Hook Elementary, classrooms carried the fingerprints of childhood everywhere. Tiny jackets hanging unevenly on hooks. Snow boots lined beneath cubbies. Drawings taped proudly to walls. Construction paper Christmas trees covered in glitter. Handwritten spelling words. Half-finished math assignments. Everything inside those rooms reflected lives still in the process of becoming. Teachers often described first graders as existing in a strange emotional space between babyhood and independence. They still cried easily. Still reached instinctively for trusted adults when frightened. Yet they were also beginning to discover their own personalities. Some students were loud and fearless, eager to answer every question. Others hid behind shyness until the right teacher made them feel safe enough to speak. Victoria Soto understood that better than most. At 27 years old, she carried herself with the quiet warmth that made children trust her quickly. Teaching was not simply employment to her, it was part of her identity. Friends described her as patient, energetic, and deeply compassionate. She came from a close family and loved working with children, because she believed small acts of encouragement could shape entire lives. Inside her classroom, students felt protected. Her walls were filled with colorful decorations, reading charts, and holiday crafts. She smiled often. She knelt beside desks to help struggling students sound out difficult words. She celebrated tiny victories that adults often overlook, like a shy child finally reading aloud confidently. To 6-year-olds, teachers are more than educators. They are interpreters of the world. They explain why snow falls, why sharing matters, why letters form words. They comfort children after playground accidents and reassure them when parents are late for pickup. In many ways, they become temporary guardians entrusted with childhood itself. Lauren Rousseau brought a similar gentleness into her classroom. At only 30 years old, she was known for her love of books and learning. She had an easy smile and a calm demeanor that helped nervous children settle into routines. Her students decorated ornaments and practiced handwriting while Christmas break approached. Like many teachers at Sandy Hook, she poured emotional energy into making the classroom feel welcoming and safe. The adults inside that building saw the children not as statistics, but as individuals with quirks, fears, and dreams. One child loved dinosaurs so much he corrected adults about species names. Another wanted to become a firefighter because he admired the trucks. Some struggled with reading while excelling in art. Some laughed so loudly during recess teachers could hear them across the playground. Others clung shyly to classroom aides during the first months of school before gradually finding confidence. Their parents carried entire futures in their minds for them. College someday. Birthday parties. Little league games. Graduation photos. First heartbreaks. Careers. Weddings. Families of their own. Every parent unconsciously imagines the long road ahead for a child. Even during difficult moments, there exists a quiet certainty that tomorrow will come. That there will always be another bedtime story, another school picture day, another Christmas morning. That illusion shattered forever inside Sandy Hook Elementary. Among the staff was Dawn Hochsprung, the school principal, whose energy seemed to fill every hallway she entered. She believed schools should feel joyful, not institutional. Colleagues admired her leadership because it came without arrogance. She knew students by name. She listened carefully to teachers. She moved through the building with purpose, always trying to improve the environment around her. Children trusted her because she spoke to them kindly rather than talking down to them. School psychologist Mary Sherlach carried another kind of emotional burden. Her work involved helping students struggling with anxiety, emotional difficulties, or developmental challenges. She was described as deeply empathetic, someone who dedicated herself to understanding children others might overlook. In schools, people like Mary often become invisible emotional anchors. They absorb the fears and struggles of children quietly, while asking for little recognition themselves. Teachers and staff at Sandy Hook represented the best parts of elementary education: patience, protection, routine, and care. None of them trained for combat. None expected violence. Their instincts were built around nurturing children, not shielding them from bullets. Outside the school, meanwhile, Adam Lanza drifted further away from normal human connection. People who encountered him over the years often struggled to describe him, because he seemed emotionally distant even when physically present. Former classmates remembered him avoiding interaction whenever possible. His body language itself appeared defensive, shoulders tight, movements stiff, eyes avoiding contact. Teachers reportedly noticed intellectual ability paired with severe discomfort in social settings. As he grew older, those difficulties deepened into extreme isolation. His relationship with his mother became increasingly central to his life, because almost every other relationship disappeared. Nancy Lanza attempted to manage her son's escalating withdrawal while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. But maintaining normalcy around Adam became nearly impossible over time. Reports later described him as hypersensitive to noise, touch, and social interaction. Communication deteriorated. Isolation intensified. The internet replaced real-world relationships almost entirely. Inside his bedroom, Adam spent countless hours consuming material related to mass violence. Investigators later uncovered spreadsheets documenting previous shootings and killers. He appeared fascinated not merely by violence itself, but by the mechanics of massacres, timelines, body counts, psychological profiles, media coverage. The obsession resembled compulsive study rather than emotional rage. Yet beneath it lurked something profoundly disturbing. He existed in a psychological void increasingly detached from ordinary empathy. Even photographs of Adam as a child create unsettling contrasts in hindsight. In some images, he appears fragile and painfully thin, almost disappearing into oversized clothing. There is no obvious monster visible in those pictures. No expression announcing future horror. That ambiguity would later haunt investigators and the public alike. People desperately wanted a clear explanation, a visible sign of evil that could make the tragedy feel preventable. Instead, they found complexity, isolation, untreated psychological deterioration, and unanswered questions. But while Adam withdrew into darkness, life at Sandy Hook Elementary continued with warmth and routine. Children practiced holiday songs for parents. Teachers finalized lesson plans before winter break. Some students created handmade gifts using popsicle sticks and glitter. Others counted down the remaining school days until Christmas vacation. Excitement lingered in classrooms, because December always feels magical to young children. Snow itself can transform an ordinary playground into a wonderland at that age. The contrast between those innocent routines and the violence approaching the school would later become almost unbearable for survivors to describe. One moment children discussed presents and cartoons. Minutes later, many would be hiding beneath desks listening to classmates die nearby. The victims of Sandy Hook were not random abstractions. They were children who loved stuffed animals, cartoons, and bedtime stories. Adults who dedicated their lives to teaching and protecting them. Their humanity became essential to remember, because mass tragedies often reduce lives into numbers too quickly. 20 children. 6 adults. Statistics flatten individuality. But each victim left behind specific absences impossible to replace. Bedrooms frozen in time. Half-finished drawings. Toothbrushes beside sinks. Tiny shoes near front doors. Christmas presents already purchased, but never opened. Parents who would continue waking instinctively before remembering the nightmare was real. The adults who died inside Sandy Hook Elementary made choices during unimaginable terror that revealed extraordinary courage. Teachers shielded children with their own bodies. Staff members rushed toward danger instead of away from it. These were not trained soldiers or police officers. They were educators responding instinctively to protect children entrusted to them. And perhaps that is what makes Sandy Hook linger so painfully in public memory even years later. It was not merely violence. America had seen violence before. It was the destruction of innocence in a place specifically designed to nurture it. The victims represented the absolute vulnerability of childhood. Small bodies inside tiny classroom chairs. First graders still learning how to read. Teachers whose greatest concern hours earlier may have been holiday lesson plans, or restless students before winter break. On the morning of December 14, 2012, those children walked into school carrying backpacks filled with crayons, homework folders, and permission slips. None of them knew they were walking into history. None of the teachers knew they would soon face choices demanding impossible bravery. And none of the parents kissing their children goodbye at the front door imagined it would be the last time they would ever see them alive. The first murder happened in silence. Before dawn had fully settled over Newtown, before children climbed sleepily into winter coats, and before Sandy Hook Elementary opened its doors for another school day, Adam Lanza walked through the darkened halls of the home he shared with his mother. Outside, the December air was cold and still. Frost coated the windows. The neighborhood remained asleep beneath the pale blue light of early morning. Nothing moved except the faint swaying of bare tree branches in the winter wind. Inside the house, Nancy Lanza lay in bed. Investigators would later reconstruct only fragments of those final moments. There were no surviving witnesses. No clear explanation. Only the brutal evidence left behind. Adam entered his mother's bedroom carrying a rifle. The woman who had spent years trying to care for him, trying to navigate the maze of his isolation and psychological decline, never escaped the room alive. The gunshots shattered the silence of the house. Nancy was struck multiple times in the head. The violence was excessive, intimate, final. Her body collapsed into blood-soaked sheets, while the rest of the home remained eerily untouched. Christmas decorations still stood nearby. Family photographs remained hanging on walls. In another context, the house could have passed for ordinary suburban life. But after killing his mother, Adam did not flee. He moved methodically through the home gathering weapons and ammunition. A Bushmaster XM-15 E2S semi-automatic rifle. 2 handguns. Multiple magazines loaded with bullets. He dressed almost entirely in black. Earplugs. Tactical clothing. Everything about his preparation suggested planning rather than impulse. There was no hesitation visible in the evidence left behind. Only cold progression from one step to the next. Outside, Newtown continued waking up. Parents packed lunches. Car engines warmed in driveways. School buses crawled through quiet neighborhoods collecting children wrapped in scarves and mittens. Teachers drove toward Sandy Hook Elementary carrying coffee cups and lesson plans, unaware that death was already moving toward them. At approximately 9:30 in the morning, Adam Lanza parked his black Honda Civic near the school. Sandy Hook Elementary looked exactly as it always had. Bright windows. Holiday decorations. Small footprints leading toward entrances dusted lightly with winter frost. Inside the classrooms, children settled into the routines of a normal Friday morning. Some practiced reading exercises. Others worked on art projects or morning assignments. Teachers moved calmly between desks helping students with spelling words and worksheets. Then the glass at the front entrance exploded. Witnesses later described the sound as shocking and unnatural, a violent crash that echoed instantly through the building. Adam had shot through the locked glass doors to force his way inside. Fragments scattered across the entryway floor while the first wave of panic rippled through nearby hallways. For a brief second, confusion outweighed fear. Schools are full of loud noises. Doors slam. Children drop books. Maintenance work creates sudden disruptions. But almost immediately came the second sound. Gunfire. Not isolated. Not accidental. Rapid, deafening bursts tearing through the corridors. The Bushmaster rifle produced a violence unlike anything most people inside the building had ever heard before. Each shot cracked through the hallways with terrifying force, echoing off walls covered in children's artwork and classroom decorations. Teachers froze. Some initially believed construction materials had fallen. Others recognized the truth instantly. Dawn Hochsprung, the school principal, reacted immediately. When she heard the noise, she rushed from a meeting alongside school psychologist Mary Sherlach and vice principal Natalie Hammond. Their instinct was not self-preservation. It was protection. They moved toward the hallway trying to understand what was happening and warn others inside the school. They encountered Adam Lanza almost immediately. The rifle fire erupted again in the corridor. Dawn Hochsprung and Mary Sherlach were killed within moments. Natalie Hammond survived despite serious injuries. Later, witnesses would remember the courage of those first adults who ran toward danger instead of away from it. They had no weapons. No body armor. Only instinct and responsibility driving them forward. Inside nearby classrooms, terror spread instantly. Teachers slammed doors shut. Some locked them. Others pushed desks against entrances with shaking hands. Children began crying as the noise grew closer. Many of them were too young to fully understand what was happening. They only understood that their teachers suddenly looked terrified. Adam moved through the school with horrifying speed. He entered classrooms where first graders sat frozen in confusion. The rifle roared repeatedly in enclosed spaces crowded with tiny desks and bookshelves. Bullets tore through walls decorated with alphabet posters and handmade Christmas crafts. The violence was chaotic and overwhelming. Survivors later struggled to describe the sound because it did not resemble anything familiar. It swallowed thought itself. In classroom after classroom, teachers tried desperately to save children. Some shoved students into closets and bathrooms. Others hid them beneath desks or inside cabinets. Teachers whispered frantically for silence while children sobbed and clung to one another. Tiny hands covered mouths to suppress crying. Some children squeezed their eyes shut, believing, in the simple logic of childhood, that if they could not see danger, then danger might disappear. But the gunfire kept coming. Victoria Soto acted with extraordinary courage during those unbearable minutes. Inside her classroom, she attempted to hide students and misdirect the shooter away from them. Reports later suggested she told Adam the children were somewhere else in the building, trying to buy precious seconds for terrified students hiding nearby. She was killed protecting them. Other teachers used their own bodies as shields. In several classrooms, investigators would later find evidence of adults physically covering children when the shooting began. These were acts made in fractions of seconds, decisions driven entirely by instinct and love. The youngest victims never had a chance to understand what was happening. Some had likely never even heard real gunfire before that morning. The classroom, which only minutes earlier had been a place of routine and safety, transformed suddenly into chaos filled with screaming, shattered glass, smoke, and blood. Tiny chairs overturned. Papers scattered. Holiday decorations fluttered from walls disturbed by the force of bullets tearing through the rooms. The attack unfolded in less than 5 minutes. That fact would later become almost impossible for many people to process. Entire families destroyed. Lives permanently shattered. A national trauma born within the span of a few terrible minutes. Outside the school, emergency calls flooded dispatchers. The voices on those calls carried confusion, panic, screaming, disbelief. Some callers could barely form sentences. Reports of a shooter inside the elementary school spread rapidly through local law enforcement. Police vehicles raced toward Sandy Hook, while officers struggled to comprehend the information arriving through radios. An elementary school. Children. Multiple victims. As officers approached the building, terrified survivors began fleeing outside. Teachers led students through hallways and exits with hands raised, trying to shield children from the horror around them. Some students were covered in blood that was not theirs. Others cried uncontrollably. Many remained eerily silent, shocked beyond tears. One chilling image from that morning would remain burned into public memory forever. A line of tiny children being evacuated from the school, each child holding onto the shoulder or clothing of the child in front of them while adults guided them to safety. The innocence of that image collided brutally with the reality unfolding inside the building. Meanwhile, Adam Lanza continued moving through the school, firing repeatedly. Investigators later determined he carried hundreds of rounds of ammunition. The rifle's firepower allowed him to inflict devastating injuries within seconds. Walls, doors, furniture, and bodies were shredded by bullets in the confined classroom spaces. Then, as police officers closed in, the shooting suddenly stopped. Silence inside the school felt surreal after the violence. Officers advanced cautiously through hallways littered with shell casings and shattered glass. The smell of gunpowder hung heavily in the air. Alarms blared somewhere in the building while survivors remained hidden in closets and corners too frightened to emerge. They found Adam Lanza dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He had turned the weapon on himself before police reached him. The massacre was over. But the horror had only begun. As officers moved through the classrooms, the scale of the tragedy became clear piece by piece. Tiny bodies. Blood pooled across classroom floors. Teachers collapsed near students they had tried to protect. Holiday decorations stained red. The contrast between childhood innocence and the brutality of the scene struck even experienced investigators with overwhelming force. Outside, parents gathered behind police tape as rumors spread wildly through the crowd. Some children had already been evacuated to nearby firehouses and reunification centers. Parents searched frantically among survivors for familiar faces. Relief exploded for some families when children emerged alive. For others, there was only waiting. Every minute without answers deepened the terror. Parents called phones that would never be answered again. Mothers scanned lines of evacuated students over and over desperately, hoping they had somehow missed their child the first time. The winter air grew colder as the realization spread through Newtown. Not every child was coming home. Inside Sandy Hook Elementary, the final count emerged slowly and painfully. 20 children murdered. 6 adult staff members killed trying to protect them. 26 victims inside the school itself, in addition to Nancy Lanza murdered earlier that morning. 27 dead altogether, including the gunman. The youngest victims were 6 years old. The massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary became one of the deadliest school shootings in American history, not because of its duration, but because of its speed and its targets. An elementary school. First graders. Teachers who died shielding children with their own bodies. And outside, beyond the shattered windows and flashing emergency lights, snow still covered the quiet streets of Newtown, as though the world itself had not yet understood what had happened inside that building. The silence after the gunfire felt unnatural. Inside Sandy Hook Elementary School, alarms continued echoing through the corridors while police officers moved cautiously between classrooms with weapons raised. The smell of burnt gunpowder lingered thick in the air, mixing with the metallic scent of blood and the faint traces of crayons, glue, and cafeteria food that still belonged to the school's ordinary morning routine only minutes earlier. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang unanswered. Somewhere else, a child cried softly from a hiding place, too terrified to come out. The first officers entering the school had expected chaos. They had not expected devastation on this scale. Glass covered the entrance floor where Adam Lanza had shot his way inside. Bullet holes scarred walls lined with children's artwork and holiday decorations. Tiny backpacks remained hanging beside classroom doors, as though their owners might return at any moment. The contrast was almost unbearable. Everything inside the school still reflected childhood. Colorful paper snowflakes, reading charts, construction paper ornaments. Yet beneath those decorations lay bodies. Some officers later admitted the scene haunted them for years. Veteran responders accustomed to violence found themselves emotionally shattered by what they encountered in those classrooms. Elementary schools are built small. The desks are tiny. The chairs are tiny. The coats hanging near the walls belong to children barely tall enough to reach the classroom sinks. Every detail reinforced the age of the victims. As police cleared room after room, surviving students remained hidden in closets, bathrooms, and beneath desks. Teachers whispered reassurance through trembling voices while officers carefully announced themselves. Many children emerged confused rather than fully aware of the massacre around them. Some covered their ears. Others clung desperately to adults. Several were led through hallways with their eyes intentionally turned away from the bodies nearby. Outside, the school grounds had transformed into a sea of flashing emergency lights. Police vehicles, ambulances, and fire trucks crowded the roads surrounding Sandy Hook Elementary while helicopters circled overhead. Reporters began arriving almost immediately. Television cameras pointed toward the school entrance as the first fragmented details reached national news stations. Parents gathered behind police tape in growing numbers, many still believing there had been some kind of misunderstanding. Then came the waiting. Children who escaped the school alive were transported to nearby reunification centers, including the local firehouse. Teachers attempted to comfort them while authorities worked desperately to identify survivors and victims. The children sat wrapped in blankets, some staring silently into space while others cried uncontrollably. Many asked the same questions repeatedly. Where is my mom? Where is my dad? Why were there loud noises? Some children described hearing popping sounds. Others spoke about teachers telling them to hide. One survivor later remembered seeing classmates covered in blood, but not fully understanding what had happened until much later. At the firehouse, parents flooded through the doors searching frantically for their children. Every reunion unfolded like emotional whiplash. Relief. Screaming. Crying. Parents collapsing to their knees while holding children tightly enough to hurt. Some families sobbed uncontrollably from gratitude. Others searched room after room without finding anyone. That was when dread truly settled over Newtown. As the survivor lists became clearer, some parents realized their children were still missing. Police officers and grief counselors quietly separated those families from the others. The process itself felt cruel in its simplicity. One room for families reunited with survivors. Another for families waiting for news no parent should ever receive. Hours passed slowly beneath the cold December sky. Inside the school, investigators began the grim process of documenting the crime scene. Every bullet casing. Every shattered window. Every classroom frozen in the aftermath of violence. The scale of destruction inside the two most heavily targeted classrooms stunned even experienced investigators. The walls were torn apart by rifle rounds. Desks overturned. Papers scattered across floors stained dark with blood. In some places, children's drawings still hung untouched above the devastation below, creating horrifying contrasts between innocence and brutality. Holiday crafts remained taped to bulletin boards. Tiny jackets still rested on hooks where children had left them earlier that morning. Investigators found evidence of extraordinary courage. Teachers positioned between the gunman and students. Bodies shielding children. Signs that staff members had attempted desperately to barricade doors or hide students before the shooter entered. Victoria Soto's classroom became one of the clearest examples of sacrifice. Reports indicated she had tried to protect students until the very end. The crime scene extended beyond the school itself. Back at the Lanza home, investigators discovered Nancy Lanza dead in her bedroom. Her murder reframed the timeline of the tragedy. Adam had begun the massacre hours earlier inside his own house, before driving to the school armed with multiple firearms and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. The home itself felt disturbingly still compared to the violence investigators had already witnessed at Sandy Hook. Christmas decorations remained in place. Furniture sat undisturbed. But inside Nancy's bedroom, blood stained the bed where she had been killed. Investigators carefully examined computers, documents, photographs, and Adam's personal belongings searching for answers. They found fragments instead. Hard drives damaged or destroyed. Evidence of obsessive research into mass shootings. Disturbing online activity. Social isolation, so extreme it bordered on total detachment from society. Yet no single document clearly explained why he chose Sandy Hook Elementary, or why he targeted children. That absence of explanation would become one of the most frustrating aspects of the investigation. America desperately wanted a motive. People searched for a coherent narrative that could somehow make the massacre understandable. Political extremism. Revenge. Hatred toward a specific individual. But investigators uncovered no simple reason. Adam Lanza appeared consumed by mental deterioration, violent obsession, and profound isolation rather than any clear ideological agenda. As the hours passed, the names of the victims slowly emerged. Authorities withheld public release initially while families were notified privately. That process became another layer of agony. Police officers arrived at homes across Newtown carrying news capable of destroying entire futures in seconds. Some parents collapsed immediately upon hearing confirmation. Others refused to believe it. Some demanded officers check again, because there had to be a mistake. Their child was only 6 years old. Their child was supposed to come home after school. The human mind resists horror at first. It searches desperately for alternative explanations even while reality closes in. Across town, churches opened their doors for grieving families. Strangers embraced one another in parking lots and sidewalks. Local businesses closed early. The entire community moved as though submerged underwater, functioning mechanically while struggling to comprehend the enormity of what had happened. Meanwhile, national media coverage exploded. Television stations interrupted regular programming. Reporters repeated early details while cautioning that information remained incomplete. Images of children being evacuated from the school aired continuously. Helicopter footage showed emergency vehicles surrounding the building. The words elementary school shooting echoed across every major news network in America. For many viewers, the emotional impact was immediate and visceral. People could imagine high school students facing violence. They could even comprehend workplace shootings or gang-related murders. But first graders. Tiny children sitting in classrooms decorated with Christmas ornaments. The sheer innocence of the victims intensified the horror in ways that transcended politics and geography. President Barack Obama addressed the nation later that day with visible emotion. Even seasoned political reporters noted how deeply affected he appeared while speaking about the murdered children and grieving families. Across the country, flags lowered to half-staff. Candlelight vigils began forming in cities thousands of miles away from Connecticut. But inside Newtown itself, the grief felt far more personal than symbolic. People knew one another there. Victims were not distant faces on television screens. They were classmates, neighbors, children seen at soccer games and grocery stores. Teachers had taught siblings from the same families for years. Parents recognized each other from school events and birthday parties. The massacre tore through the social fabric of the town itself. In the days following the shooting, investigators continued piecing together Adam Lanza's final movements. Surveillance timelines, ballistic evidence, witness statements, digital records. They reconstructed how quickly the attack unfolded and how little time existed for anyone inside the school to react. The timeline shocked even experts. From the moment Adam entered the school until his suicide, only minutes had passed. The sheer speed of the massacre demonstrated how devastating semi-automatic rifle fire could become in confined spaces crowded with defenseless people. Most victims were killed before police could physically reach the shooter. That realization fueled immediate national debates about gun laws and school safety. But for families in Newtown, those debates often felt distant compared to raw grief. Bedrooms remained untouched inside homes where children would never return. Christmas presents sat hidden in closets waiting for recipients who were already gone. Some parents reportedly could not bear to enter their children's rooms. Others sat inside them for hours surrounded by toys and blankets, still carrying traces of their child's existence. At Sandy Hook Elementary itself, the building became both crime scene and graveyard of memory. Investigators worked carefully through every room, while outside the school fences transformed into memorials overflowing with flowers, stuffed animals, handwritten notes, candles, and photographs. Snow gradually covered some offerings, while new ones arrived continuously from across the world. Messages appeared in every imaginable form. Prayers, drawings from children, letters from grieving strangers, promises that the victims would never be forgotten. Yet beneath all the public mourning lingered another truth difficult to confront. No investigation, no matter how thorough, could fully explain how a quiet 20-year-old man crossed the invisible boundary between obsession and mass murder. Investigators could document his weapons, his mental struggles, his isolation, his fascinations with violence. But none of those details restored what had been lost inside Sandy Hook Elementary School that winter morning. 20 children were still dead. 6 educators were still gone. And an ordinary elementary school had become one of the most haunting crime scenes in modern American history. In the days after the massacre, Newtown became a town suspended between grief and investigation. Snow continued falling softly across the streets, while satellite trucks lined the roads outside churches, schools, and police buildings. Reporters spoke in hushed voices beneath gray winter skies. Everywhere, faces looked exhausted. Parents moved like ghosts through grocery stores and parking lots. Teachers stared blankly during interviews they never wanted to give. The entire town seemed trapped inside a nightmare that refused to loosen its grip. For investigators, however, the work had only begun. The crime scene at Sandy Hook Elementary was painstakingly processed piece by piece. Detectives photographed every hallway, every classroom, every shell casing scattered across the floors. Ballistics experts mapped trajectories. Forensic teams collected blood samples, fingerprints, fragments of broken glass, damaged electronics, and ammunition magazines left behind by Adam Lanza. The scale of the investigation quickly expanded beyond a local case. Federal authorities became involved. Behavioral analysts examined evidence searching for patterns, motives, warning signs, anything that could explain why 20 children and 6 educators had been slaughtered inside an elementary school. But from the very beginning, the investigation faced a frustrating reality. The shooter was already dead. There would be no interrogation. No confession. No courtroom testimony. No opportunity to force Adam Lanza to explain himself under the pressure of questioning. Everything investigators learned about him would come indirectly through digital records, interviews, psychological evaluations, and the memories of people who once knew him. And the deeper they looked, the stranger the picture became. Former classmates described Adam as intelligent, but profoundly isolated. Teachers remembered him avoiding social interaction, almost obsessively. Some recalled his discomfort with eye contact and physical touch. Others spoke about his unusual sensitivity to noise and changes in routine. There were discussions about developmental disorders, possible autism spectrum traits, severe anxiety, obsessive behaviors, and emotional withdrawal. Yet even among mental health experts, no single diagnosis neatly explained the violence that eventually erupted. Investigators searched for the classic indicators often associated with mass shooters. Extreme anger. Clear ideological radicalization. Personal vendettas. Explicit threats. But Adam's case resisted simplification. Instead, detectives found layer upon layer of detachment from ordinary human connection. His online activity became one of the central focuses of the investigation. Inside his room, authorities discovered computers containing disturbing material related to mass killings. Adam had apparently spent years studying previous shootings in obsessive detail. Spreadsheets cataloging massacres. Research into weapons and body counts. Discussions about violence. He appeared fascinated by the psychology and mechanics of mass murder itself. Yet even there, investigators struggled to locate a clear trigger. There was no final manifesto explaining why Sandy Hook Elementary had been chosen. No video declaration. No ideological statement. Instead, Adam left behind fragments of thought that painted a portrait of severe psychological deterioration, without offering a satisfying answer. That absence created a vacuum quickly filled by speculation. The American public demanded explanations, almost immediately. Television panels debated mental illness, gun laws, violent media, prescription medication, parenting, school security, bullying, and internet culture. Every aspect of Adam's life became dissected under national scrutiny. People wanted certainty, because certainty creates comfort. If a single cause could be identified, perhaps future tragedies could be prevented. But real investigations rarely provide clean narratives. Detectives interviewed relatives, former teachers, neighbors, and anyone who had interacted with Adam or Nancy Lanza over the years. Again and again, witnesses described increasing isolation. Adam rarely left the house. Communication with others became minimal. Some reported that even interactions with his mother had grown strained and distant in the years before the massacre. Nancy Lanza herself became a subject of painful public scrutiny. Questions emerged about her firearms collection. Why had she kept multiple weapons inside a home with a psychologically troubled son? Why had she introduced him to shooting ranges? Did she recognize how severe his deterioration had become? Yet those who knew Nancy often described a mother overwhelmed rather than malicious. She appeared to spend years attempting to manage a son whose emotional world became increasingly unreachable. Some believed she underestimated the danger. Others argued she was simply exhausted and desperate to connect with him through activities he enjoyed, including recreational shooting. Investigators uncovered evidence suggesting Adam had been deteriorating for years while simultaneously disappearing from meaningful oversight. Medical professionals had reportedly evaluated him during adolescence. School interventions occurred at various stages. Concerns about social functioning existed long before the shooting. But like many complex mental health cases in America, responsibility became fragmented between systems, schools, family, and healthcare providers. No single institution maintained full control or understanding of his condition. This raised terrifying questions. How does someone descend so deeply into isolation, without intervention strong enough to stop them? At what point does eccentric behavior become dangerous? And how many warning signs only become obvious after tragedy strikes? The investigation also focused intensely on the timeline of December 14th itself. Detectives reconstructed Adam's final movements minute by minute. They examined ammunition purchases, weapon ownership records, computer searches, and surveillance footage. The evidence suggested planning rather than spontaneous violence. He had chosen his weapons deliberately. He carried large amounts of ammunition. He knew the school layout well enough to move quickly through it. Yet the choice of target remained hauntingly difficult to explain. Why an elementary school? Why first graders? Some analysts theorized Adam viewed children as symbols of innocence or vulnerability. Others suggested the attack reflected his own fractured relationship with childhood and social development. Still others argued the target itself may have been chosen precisely because it represented maximum horror and public impact. No theory fully answered the question. Meanwhile, survivors and witnesses provided investigators with traumatic first-hand accounts of the massacre. Teachers described hearing rapid gunfire echoing through the halls. Students remembered hiding in closets and bathrooms while classmates cried beside them. Some survivors recalled teachers trying desperately to stay calm even while visibly terrified. One chilling aspect repeatedly emerged in testimony: the speed of the attack. Witnesses described how little time existed between the first gunshots and the arrival of overwhelming chaos. Teachers had seconds to react. Some successfully hid students. Others never had the chance. Investigators concluded that many victims were killed almost immediately after the shooter entered classrooms. As details became public, the nation's grief slowly transformed into political fury. The Bushmaster rifle used in the shooting became a central symbol in debates about semi-automatic weapons. Gun control advocates argued Sandy Hook represented undeniable proof that access to such firepower posed catastrophic risks. Opponents countered that the issue centered around mental illness rather than firearms themselves. Washington erupted into one of the most emotionally charged policy debates in modern American history. President Obama publicly pushed for expanded background checks and restrictions on certain weapons. Families of victims traveled to speak with lawmakers. Emotional testimonies filled television broadcasts. Candlelight vigils became political rallies demanding reform. But despite the emotional weight of 20 murdered children, legislative efforts largely stalled amid fierce national division. That failure deepened the despair felt by many grieving families. For them, the massacre was not theoretical. It was not a debate topic. It was an empty bedroom. A child's voice permanently missing from the house. Some parents later described feeling physically ill while hearing politicians argue abstractly about rights and policies, while their own children lay buried in cemeteries. And then the conspiracy theories began. Almost immediately after the shooting, online forums erupted with false claims insisting the massacre had been staged. Some individuals claimed grieving parents were actors. Others argued no children had actually died. The theories spread rapidly through certain corners of the internet, fueled by distrust, sensationalism, and cruelty disguised as skepticism. Among the loudest voices was Alex Jones, whose broadcasts amplified claims that Sandy Hook was a hoax designed to justify gun control measures. For the families, the harassment became another nightmare layered atop unbearable grief. Parents already shattered by loss suddenly found strangers accusing them of lying about their dead children. Some received death threats. Others were stalked online. Personal information spread across conspiracy communities. Families relocated multiple times attempting to escape harassment from people convinced the massacre had never happened. Investigators found themselves confronting not only a mass murder investigation, but also a growing wave of misinformation poisoning public discourse. The conspiracy theories reflected something deeply unsettling about modern tragedy. Even overwhelming evidence, crime scene documentation, autopsy reports, witness testimony, funerals, proved insufficient for some people determined to reject reality itself. Meanwhile, psychological experts continued analyzing Adam Lanza's history, searching for lessons that might prevent future massacres. His writings and behaviors suggested profound alienation from humanity. He appeared consumed by obsessive thinking patterns, emotional detachment, and nihilistic fixation on violence. Yet experts repeatedly cautioned against simplistic conclusions. Millions of people struggle with mental illness without becoming violent. Millions feel isolated without committing atrocities. Adam's case represented a catastrophic convergence of factors, rather than a predictable outcome from any single diagnosis. That ambiguity frustrated the public, but reflected the truth investigators kept encountering. There was no single monster hidden behind Sandy Hook. There was instead a deeply disturbed young man, access to devastating weaponry, systemic failures, untreated psychological collapse, and a society struggling to recognize danger before it explodes. As weeks turned into months, Newtown slowly attempted to rebuild daily life around impossible absence. Funerals gave way to memorials. Memorials gave way to anniversaries. The Sandy Hook Elementary building itself eventually became too painful to preserve. The school was demolished years later, as though the town needed to physically erase the structure carrying so much horror. But investigations do not end cleanly when the killer dies. Questions linger. Could warning signs have been recognized sooner? Could intervention have altered the outcome? Could access to weapons have been prevented? The official investigation ultimately concluded that no single motive could be definitively established. Adam Lanza left behind destruction, but not clarity. His inner world remained fragmented and partially unknowable even after exhaustive forensic examination. And perhaps that uncertainty became one of the most terrifying aspects of Sandy Hook. The realization that unimaginable violence can emerge not from cinematic evil, but from silent deterioration hidden behind closed doors. The deeper investigators dug into Adam Lanza's life, the more they realized the breakthrough they were searching for would never arrive in the form they wanted. There would be no hidden letter suddenly discovered in a desk drawer explaining everything. No accomplice stepping forward. No dramatic revelation capable of transforming chaos into logic. Instead, the real breakthrough emerged slowly and painfully through patterns showing how a young man had quietly vanished from society long before he physically entered Sandy Hook Elementary School with a rifle. At first, investigators focused intensely on finding a direct trigger. A rejection. A humiliation. A recent event. Something immediate that could explain why December 14th became the day of the massacre. Detectives reviewed emails, internet history, phone records, medical documents, and witness interviews searching for escalation during the weeks before the shooting. Yet again and again, they encountered the same unsettling reality: Adam's psychological collapse had not been sudden. It had been gradual. Years gradual. The breakthrough came not from discovering one shocking secret, but from realizing how thoroughly Adam had disconnected from ordinary human life. By age 20, his world had narrowed into isolation, so severe it resembled self-erasure. Investigators found evidence suggesting he spent enormous amounts of time inside darkened rooms communicating almost entirely through screens. Even simple human interaction appeared painful for him. Family connections deteriorated. Friendships disappeared. Daily routines dissolved. One investigator later described the case as studying someone who had slowly become psychologically untethered from the world around him. That realization reframed the massacre itself. Sandy Hook was not the product of one bad day or one explosive emotional breakdown. It was the final eruption of years spent spiraling inward without meaningful intervention strong enough to stop the descent. Adam Lanza had become consumed by obsession, alienation, and violent fixation while remaining largely hidden behind the walls of his home. As forensic teams reconstructed his digital life, disturbing details continued surfacing. He reportedly maintained spreadsheets documenting mass shootings and their death tolls. Investigators discovered online discussions reflecting deep cynicism toward society and humanity itself. He consumed material related to violence with obsessive intensity. Yet unlike some killers who seek notoriety openly, Adam remained profoundly withdrawn. There were no public threats. No dramatic declarations. His darkness remained internalized until the morning it exploded outward. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit became heavily involved in examining his psychological profile. Experts reviewed medical records, developmental history, school evaluations, and digital evidence trying to understand the convergence of factors leading to mass murder. Their findings painted a portrait of severe social impairment combined with obsessive-compulsive tendencies, sensory issues, profound anxiety, and escalating isolation. But even then, investigators remained cautious. They understood the danger of turning mental illness itself into the villain. Millions of people live with autism spectrum disorders, anxiety, depression, or social difficulties without harming anyone. The challenge was understanding why Adam's particular combination of psychological issues, environmental factors, and violent obsession evolved into catastrophe. Another breakthrough emerged through analysis of his relationship with mass shootings themselves. Investigators concluded Adam did not merely study previous massacres academically. He appeared to identify with them emotionally and psychologically. Columbine, Virginia Tech, and other mass killings became reference points shaping his worldview. Over time, violence itself seemed to transform into a language through which he interpreted existence. That realization terrified investigators, because it revealed how deeply media coverage of mass violence could embed itself inside vulnerable minds. Adam reportedly admired the scale and impact of previous attacks. He understood that massacres guaranteed attention, guaranteed permanence, guaranteed fear. The horrifying possibility emerged that Sandy Hook itself had been designed not around personal grievance, but around symbolic devastation. An elementary school. First graders. Maximum innocence destroyed for maximum emotional impact. The more investigators analyzed the target selection, the more chilling it became. Sandy Hook Elementary represented vulnerability itself. Children too young to defend themselves. Teachers trained to nurture rather than fight. A community that embodied safety and suburban normalcy. By attacking that environment, Adam did more than kill people. He shattered an illusion Americans desperately wanted to believe, that some places remained untouched by violence. Meanwhile, outside the investigation rooms, the country continued fracturing under the weight of grief and anger. Families of victims began stepping into public life despite unimaginable trauma. Some parents who could barely survive the mornings found themselves speaking before lawmakers, journalists, and activists, because they believed silence would guarantee more deaths. They carried photographs of smiling 6-year-olds into government buildings. Tiny faces stared out from posters and memorial cards, while adults debated policies around them. For many families, advocacy became a way to survive grief. They founded organizations focused on gun violence prevention, mental health awareness, and school safety reforms. Some parents traveled endlessly giving speeches, meeting politicians, and telling the stories of their murdered children over and over until emotional exhaustion became permanent. The pain never lessened, but purpose gave it direction. One particularly important breakthrough came from the public release of investigative reports detailing how quickly the massacre unfolded. The timeline horrified even those already familiar with the case. From the moment Adam entered the school to the moment he killed himself, only minutes passed. Investigators concluded that the lethality of the Bushmaster rifle allowed catastrophic casualties in an incredibly short period. Many victims sustained multiple gunshot wounds before adults could fully comprehend what was happening. This became central to national debates surrounding assault-style weapons and high-capacity magazines. Experts testified that the speed and firepower involved dramatically limited opportunities for intervention. Teachers had almost no time to react. Police arrived quickly by most standards, yet the massacre was essentially over before officers could physically stop it. The realization deepened public fear surrounding mass shootings across America. If 20 children could be murdered within minutes inside an elementary school, what place truly remained safe? Schools nationwide responded with sweeping changes. Lockdown drills intensified. Security systems upgraded. Bulletproof glass, armed officers, emergency protocols, active shooter training, all became increasingly normalized parts of American education after Sandy Hook. Children born after the massacre would grow up practicing how to hide from gunmen before they fully understood multiplication. That cultural transformation became one of Sandy Hook's lasting legacies. But another breakthrough emerged in a courtroom years later, far removed from the original massacre itself. The conspiracy theories surrounding Sandy Hook had continued spreading online with shocking cruelty. Families already traumatized by unimaginable loss faced harassment from strangers convinced the shooting was fake. Some grieving parents were followed, threatened, and accused of participating in elaborate government deception. The emotional toll became unbearable for many. Eventually, several families pursued legal action against Alex Jones and others who amplified the false claims. The lawsuits transformed into something larger than defamation cases. They became public examinations of how misinformation weaponizes grief. During court proceedings, parents described years of harassment layered atop the trauma of losing children. They spoke about strangers screaming at them in public, accusing them of inventing dead sons and daughters. Some families relocated repeatedly trying to escape abuse fueled by conspiracy culture. The verdicts eventually ordered enormous financial damages against Jones. For many observers, the rulings represented a rare moment of accountability in an era dominated by viral lies and online radicalization. The courts effectively declared that grief itself could not be endlessly exploited without consequence. Yet even those victories felt incomplete. No lawsuit restored a child. No policy debate resurrected a teacher. No psychological profile fully explained why Adam Lanza crossed the final boundary into slaughter. Perhaps the most haunting breakthrough of the entire investigation came through understanding what never happened. There was no dramatic intervention moment where authorities ignored explicit threats. No single catastrophic mistake. No once-seen investigators could point toward and say, this was the moment everything could have been stopped. Instead, Sandy Hook emerged from accumulation. Isolation accumulating into detachment. Obsession accumulating into fixation. Access to weapons accumulating beside deteriorating mental health. Silence accumulating year after year behind closed doors. That ambiguity unsettled investigators, because it resisted the comforting idea that tragedies always announce themselves clearly beforehand. In reality, Adam Lanza often appeared less like a cinematic villain than a ghost slowly disappearing inside his own fractured mind. And ghosts are difficult to stop, because people frequently mistake disappearance for harmlessness. Back in Newtown, life continued unevenly around the absence left behind. Some parents could not bear hearing school bells anymore. Teachers across the country mailed handwritten letters to Sandy Hook families describing how they hugged their own students tighter after the massacre. Memorials expanded across parks and churches. 20 small Christmas trees appeared in some vigils, each representing a murdered child. The original Sandy Hook Elementary building was eventually demolished. Many residents supported the decision because the structure itself carried unbearable emotional weight. Too many memories stained the walls. Too much horror embedded in the hallways. A new school would later rise on the site, brighter and more secure, but the ground beneath it remained sacred in the minds of grieving families. Years later, investigators and psychologists still revisit the case, searching for lessons. How do communities identify dangerous isolation before violence occurs? How should societies balance mental health treatment, civil liberties, and public safety? Can mass shootings be prevented without fundamentally changing American culture itself? No answer fully satisfies. Because Sandy Hook was never just a crime scene. It became a mirror reflecting every fear modern America struggles to confront: loneliness, violence, alienation, radicalization, weapon access, fractured mental health care systems, media obsession, and the vulnerability of children in a country unable to protect them completely. And at the center of all those debates remain the smallest victims of all. First graders who woke up expecting an ordinary school day. Children whose futures ended before they had even learned how long life was supposed to be. There was never going to be a traditional murder trial for Sandy Hook. Adam Lanza had ended his own life inside the school hallway before police reached him, leaving behind 20 murdered children, 6 dead educators, and a nation desperate for accountability that could never arrive in the usual form. No courtroom would force him to answer questions. No jury would study his face while evidence unfolded piece by piece. No sentencing hearing would allow grieving families to confront the man who shattered their lives. And yet, in the years after the massacre, justice still became a battlefield. Not inside one courtroom, but across many. The first phase unfolded through official investigations and public hearings. Federal agents, psychologists, lawmakers, and legal experts analyzed every detail surrounding the shooting. Reports spanning hundreds of pages attempted to reconstruct the massacre with clinical precision. Timelines, ballistics, psychological evaluations, emergency response analysis. Each document sought not only to explain what happened inside Sandy Hook Elementary School, but to determine whether future tragedies could somehow be prevented. For the families, however, these reports often reopened wounds instead of closing them. Reading descriptions of classroom scenes where children died was almost unbearable. Some parents refused to look at certain details entirely. Others studied every page obsessively, because the human mind cannot stop searching for meaning after catastrophic loss. Could anything have changed the outcome? Could someone have intervened earlier? Could their child have survived if events unfolded differently by only seconds? The questions became endless. Meanwhile, the national political battle surrounding gun violence intensified dramatically. President Barack Obama stood before cameras repeatedly speaking about the murdered children of Sandy Hook. During some speeches, his voice visibly faltered. Even hardened political commentators noted how deeply the tragedy appeared to affect him personally. He met privately with families, listened to their stories, and publicly urged lawmakers to take action on gun reform. The White House became a stage for grieving parents carrying framed photographs of 6-year-olds. Tiny smiles frozen forever in school portraits. The emotional pressure on Congress was immense. For a brief period, it seemed possible that the massacre might finally force major legislative changes regarding firearms in America. Expanded background checks gained broad public support. Discussions surrounding assault-style weapons dominated national media. Candlelight vigils transformed into political demonstrations demanding reform. But America remained deeply divided. Gun rights advocates argued that restricting firearms would not solve the deeper issues surrounding mental illness and violence. Others feared government overreach and constitutional erosion. Emotional testimonies from grieving parents collided with equally passionate defenses of the Second Amendment. In the end, many proposed federal reforms failed to pass. For Sandy Hook families, that political failure felt devastating. Some parents later described watching Senate votes with crushing hope, believing the deaths of 20 children would surely be enough to change something fundamental. When major legislation stalled, despair settled heavily over many families already drowning in grief. One father reportedly asked a question that echoed across countless interviews afterward: if this could not change America, what possibly could? Yet while political battles raged publicly, another quieter form of justice emerged through recognition of heroism. The educators who died protecting students became symbols of extraordinary courage. Victoria Soto's actions inside her classroom resonated deeply across the country. Teachers saw themselves reflected in her sacrifice. Schools held memorials in her honor. Scholarships and awards were created carrying her name. The image of a young teacher shielding children from gunfire became one of the defining memories of Sandy Hook. Dawn Hochsprung, Mary Sherlach, Lauren Rousseau, Anne-Marie Murphy, Rachel Davino, and the other educators killed that day were remembered not merely as victims, but as protectors who faced terror with instinctive bravery. In communities across America, teachers discussed Sandy Hook with newfound fear and responsibility. Lockdown drills intensified nationwide. Emergency protocols evolved. Some schools installed reinforced doors and bulletproof entry systems. Others added armed security officers. The massacre permanently changed how America imagined school safety. Children born after Sandy Hook would grow up practicing active shooter drills as routinely as fire drills. That became part of the legacy too. But perhaps the most emotionally charged courtroom battles connected to Sandy Hook did not involve gun laws at all. They involved lies. As conspiracy theories spread online claiming the massacre was staged, the families entered a second nightmare. Grieving parents, who had buried 6-year-old children, suddenly faced strangers accusing them of participating in government theater. Online harassment escalated into stalking, threats, and relentless abuse. Some conspiracy believers traveled physically to Newtown. Others bombarded families with accusations so cruel they sounded almost impossible to believe. For several parents, the harassment became psychologically devastating. One father reportedly found himself repeatedly explaining to strangers that his dead child had actually existed. Imagine the emotional violence of that reality. Losing a child to mass murder, then being forced to defend the fact that the child ever lived at all. Alex Jones became the most infamous figure connected to these conspiracy movements. Through broadcasts and online platforms, he amplified claims that Sandy Hook was a hoax designed to justify gun control. Millions heard those claims. Millions encountered the conspiracy online. Even after years passed, some believers continued harassing families convinced the massacre had been fabricated. Eventually, several Sandy Hook families decided to fight back legally. The lawsuits that followed became historic not only because of their financial consequences, but because they forced public examination of how misinformation destroys lives. Courtrooms once again filled with grieving parents, but this time they were confronting not the killer, but those who exploited the tragedy afterward. The testimonies were heartbreaking. Parents described receiving death threats from strangers convinced they were actors. Some families moved repeatedly trying to escape harassment. Others stopped visiting grave sites publicly because conspiracy theorists followed them. One mother described the agony of hearing people claim her murdered child never existed while she still kept the child's bedroom untouched at home. The court proceedings revealed how digital lies can evolve into real-world cruelty. For many Americans, the trials became about more than Alex Jones himself. They symbolized the broader collapse of truth in the internet age. If even murdered first graders could become targets of conspiracy culture, what boundary remained? The verdicts against Jones resulted in enormous financial judgments, totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. Legally, it represented one of the strongest public rejections of conspiracy-driven harassment in modern American history. Emotionally, however, the victories remained incomplete. Families repeatedly emphasized that no amount of money could restore what they lost. Justice after Sandy Hook always carried that same tragic limitation. Nothing could reverse December 14th. No policy reform could resurrect children. No lawsuit could erase the sound of gunfire echoing through elementary school hallways. Even the demolition of the original Sandy Hook Elementary building carried bittersweet symbolism. The structure itself had become too haunted for many residents to bear. Too much pain soaked into the walls. Eventually, the school was torn down and rebuilt entirely. Yet the ground beneath it remained sacred. Parents still drove past the area slowly. Survivors carried memories embedded far deeper than architecture. Some children who escaped the shooting grew into teenagers, and adults still wrestling with trauma they could barely articulate. Nightmares persisted. Loud noises triggered panic. Survivors' guilt lingered quietly beneath ordinary life. One haunting truth emerged repeatedly through interviews with survivors and families: trauma does not end when headlines disappear. For Newtown, Sandy Hook never truly became history. It became a permanent fracture running beneath daily existence. Children who died in first grade would now be adults if they had lived. Parents often imagined those missing futures constantly. High school graduations never attended. Birthdays permanently frozen at 6 or 7 years old. Empty chairs at Thanksgiving dinners year after year. Justice systems are designed to punish perpetrators. But Sandy Hook exposed the limitations of justice when the perpetrator dies immediately. There was no punishment severe enough for Adam Lanza, because he escaped earthly accountability the moment he pulled the trigger on himself. What remained instead was societal accountability. Debates over guns, mental health systems, online radicalization, media ethics, school security, conspiracy culture. Sandy Hook became less a single criminal case and more a moral examination of America itself. And perhaps that is why the massacre still lingers so heavily in public memory years later. Not only because children died, but because the tragedy revealed how vulnerable innocence truly is inside a fractured society struggling to protect it. In Newtown, memorials continued quietly long after television cameras disappeared. Parents visited graves beneath winter snow and summer sunlight. Teachers returned to classrooms carrying invisible emotional scars. Some survivors eventually spoke publicly about trauma and resilience. Others avoided discussing the massacre entirely. The nation moved forward because nations always do. New tragedies emerged. New headlines replaced old ones. Yet Sandy Hook remained different somehow. The image of tiny children fleeing an elementary school, while holding hands, never fully faded from American consciousness. And buried beneath every debate, every lawsuit, every memorial, every courtroom ruling, remained the same unbearable reality. 20 children walked into school on a cold December morning expecting spelling lessons and Christmas break. Instead, they became names carved into stone memorials before they were old enough to understand what death even meant. In the years that followed Sandy Hook, Newtown did what most communities forced into unimaginable tragedy eventually attempt to do. It tried to live again. But normal never returned in the way people outside the town often expected it to. There was no single moment when grief ended, no clear turning point when pain became memory instead of presence. Instead, life resumed in fragments. Some streets looked the same. Some routines continued. Children still rode bikes past the same trees, and winter still arrived with the same quiet snowfall. Yet beneath everything, an invisible weight remained, shaping how people moved through time. For the families of the victims, time itself had fractured. Mornings no longer began with simple routines, but with absence. The silence at breakfast tables became its own kind of presence. Bedrooms that once echoed with small voices remained untouched, preserved like sealed rooms in a museum of interrupted childhood. Parents learned how to live alongside grief rather than move beyond it. Some described it as carrying something heavy that never changes shape, never becomes easier, only more familiar. In public spaces across Newtown, reminders of what had happened never fully disappeared. Memorials appeared in parks, churches, and school grounds. Some were temporary, built from flowers and handwritten notes that faded with time. Others became permanent structures, etched into stone and metal. Names of the children and educators were spoken at ceremonies year after year, their absence becoming part of the town's identity whether residents wanted it or not. Even as physical memorials stabilized, emotional ones shifted constantly. For some families, anger became a dominant emotion. Anger at the shooter. Anger at systems that failed to intervene. Anger at political inaction. Anger at the fact that their children's lives had become part of national debate instead of simply being protected in life. For others, grief remained more quiet, more internal, expressed in private rituals that outsiders rarely saw. Lighting candles on birthdays. Visiting graves in silence. Keeping bedrooms exactly as they were on December 13, 2012. The broader American response evolved in layers. Immediately after the shooting, there had been shock and unified grief. Then came political conflict, legal battles, misinformation, and eventually fatigue. Over time, Sandy Hook remained present in national consciousness, but no longer in the urgent way it once had been. It became part of a larger, ongoing narrative about mass shootings in America, each new tragedy briefly pulling it back into public discussion, before fading again under the weight of newer events. Yet for those directly affected, there was no fading. The idea of closure, often used casually in public language, never truly applied. Instead, survivors and families described something more complex. Learning how to function while carrying loss. Learning how to answer simple questions about their lives without collapsing into memory. Learning how to see other children grow up while constantly imagining the ones who never would. Some of the surviving students from Sandy Hook eventually reached adolescence and adulthood. They carried memories that did not behave like normal recollections. Trauma does not organize itself into coherent narratives. It returns in fragments, triggered by sounds, smells, anniversaries, or seemingly unrelated moments. A classroom door closing too loudly. A holiday decoration resembling something from that December morning. A news headline about another shooting. Many survivors struggled with anxiety, survivor's guilt, and recurring emotional flashbacks. Some spoke publicly about their experiences, describing how they learned to navigate school life after surviving something so deeply unnatural. Others chose complete privacy, refusing interviews and avoiding public attention altogether. Both responses reflected different ways of surviving the same event. In Newtown itself, the school system adapted permanently. Security measures became more visible and structured. Entry procedures tightened. Crisis training became standard. Teachers underwent preparation, not only for fire drills, but for scenarios no educator should ever need to imagine in detail. The innocence once associated with school hallways had been fundamentally altered. Children growing up in Sandy Hook after the tragedy entered a world shaped by its shadow. They learned early about safety protocols, about lockdown procedures, about what to do if danger entered their classroom. These lessons were taught carefully, responsibly, but they still carried emotional weight that earlier generations of students never had to experience. Across the United States, Sandy Hook became a reference point that reshaped conversations about violence, safety, and responsibility. Every subsequent school shooting reopened old debates. Each time, the same questions returned with painful familiarity. Could this have been prevented? What warning signs were missed? What systems failed? Yet despite years of discussion, meaningful consensus remained elusive. The same divisions that existed before Sandy Hook persisted afterward, hardened rather than resolved. At the same time, the massacre transformed how mental health was discussed in public discourse. There was renewed focus on identifying severe psychological distress earlier, improving access to treatment, and understanding isolation as a risk factor. However, experts also repeatedly emphasized that mental illness alone could not explain or predict violence on this scale. The complexity of the Sandy Hook case resisted simple categorization, even within clinical frameworks. One of the most difficult truths that emerged over time was that prevention is not always visible in hindsight. There were fragmented warning signs in Adam Lanza's life, but they did not form a clear, actionable narrative at the time. That ambiguity forced uncomfortable reflection across institutions responsible for education, healthcare, and public safety. How many isolated individuals exist who never become violent? How can society identify risk without stigmatizing vulnerability? There were no easy answers. The cultural impact of Sandy Hook also extended deeply into media and internet behavior. The spread of conspiracy theories forced journalists, platforms, and policymakers to confront how misinformation can distort even the most documented tragedies. The emotional damage inflicted on families by denialist narratives became a case study in digital ethics. It revealed how grief can be amplified and weaponized in online spaces detached from human consequence. Legal actions taken by the families against those spreading false claims marked a turning point in how courts approached digital harm. The judgments sent a message that misinformation about real-world tragedies carries tangible consequences. But even legal victories could not fully repair the emotional damage inflicted over years of harassment. For many families, the most enduring struggle was not public debate or legal battles, but private survival. Waking up each day and continuing to exist in a world where their children no longer did. Some parents described developing routines built around memory preservation. Speaking the names of their children aloud daily. Maintaining rooms as they were. Celebrating birthdays even in absence. Others focused on advocacy work, turning personal loss into public action aimed at preventing similar tragedies. Each approach reflected a different way of negotiating the same unbearable reality. Over time, Sandy Hook also influenced architectural and security design in schools across the country. New construction projects incorporated controlled entry points, reinforced materials, and improved emergency communication systems. These changes were intended to protect, but they also served as constant reminders that safety could no longer be assumed. Perhaps the most lasting impact of Sandy Hook, however, was psychological rather than structural. It changed how an entire generation of Americans understood vulnerability. Before the massacre, elementary schools existed in collective imagination as symbols of safety. Afterward, that certainty was permanently fractured. Even in communities far removed from Newtown, parents began thinking differently about drop-offs, school buildings, and emergency preparedness. The illusion of invulnerability inside educational spaces had been broken. And yet, despite everything, life in Newtown continued in its own quiet way. Children still played in yards. Shops still opened each morning. Snow still fell across familiar streets. The town did not become defined only by tragedy, even though tragedy remained forever part of its identity. Residents learned how to hold both realities at once, ordinary life and extraordinary loss existing side by side. For visitors passing through Newtown years later, there is often a strange emotional dissonance. On the surface, it looks like any other small American town. Calm streets, trees, schools, neighborhoods. But beneath that calm lies a history that permanently altered thousands of lives and reshaped national conversations about violence, responsibility, and memory. Sandy Hook Elementary itself no longer stands as it once did. The building was demolished and replaced, but the ground beneath it remains symbolically heavy. New structures may rise, but they exist in the presence of what happened there. No architectural change can fully erase the memory embedded in the community. In the end, the legacy of Sandy Hook is not contained within a single narrative. It is not only a story of a shooter, or an investigation, or a political debate. It is a story of children who never grew up, educators who chose protection over survival, families who learned to live with absence, and a nation forced to confront the limits of its own assumptions about safety. And perhaps the most difficult truth of all is that there is no final resolution. Only remembrance. Only ongoing grief. Only the quiet persistence of names that should have belonged to long lives, but instead belong forever to one winter morning when the world changed inside a small elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut.